going into hibernation, a bear often is hiding from the cold, hard winters. And much like a bear, our company here is in hibernation, not for the fact that it's hiding from the winter and the challenges it faces, but rather gaining up its strengths. A very good morning to you all. My name is Porn Promote, and here are my colleagues, Kwanchira, Pierda, and Apaporn. We're Inspired Consulting from Chulalongkorn University. Today, we'll tell you how our company can not only come out of hibernation, but come out not as a bear, but as a bull, charging on with all of its past glory. And with the objective of providing mid to long-term loans at affordable prices to our customers, and also improving operations and credit ratings, which will eventually improve profitability, we promise you that by the end of this presentation, our company will not only come out of hibernation, but do so with glory and also a profit of approximately US 243 million. So first, let's look at some of the core competencies of this company and how they can use this to leverage into achieving its goals. For example, IFCI has excellent leadership and management, as evidenced during its hibernation stages and all the key decision making to return the company from going near bankrupt into being more profitable again. Couple this with the fact that it has faced a recent organization reorg, which brings the company closer as a whole and allows direct communication. This will be crucial in any key decision making, as it will allow the company to work together as a whole to achieve its goal. Second, it works closely with the unions and also the workers itself, which will minimize the risk of any strikes or any unwanted risk in terms of employment. And lastly, its survival mindset. As I mentioned earlier, the company was facing bankruptcy, but rather it has turned itself around. And this is very important for the company to stick to what it has achieved so far and what it has done. And we will need this in order to achieve glory. So then, let's look at the issues we've arrived today. There are three, which are the changing business environment, the unprofitable business model, and also the operation. Let's begin. For the first issue, you can see that the company has recently repositioned itself to offer more of a short to medium term loan, which means that it opens itself to increased competition, more specifically with IDBI. So now we will need to make sure that our position is correct. We need to reevaluate that this position will be profitable. As you can see here, we've derived at three positions, which are in retail, SME, and corporations. And we will make sure that whichever we pick will need to be an unmatched opportunity to maximize the profitability and also the success of this company to survive in the future. And second, the unprofitable business model. This graph depicts the negative growth in terms of net income and cost of borrowing prior to its hibernation stages. As you can see here, net income decreased by 67%, which is 20% more than the cost of borrowing. This means two things. One is the fact, obviously, that it's operating at a loss. But second, and more importantly, is the fact that it wasn't able to shift its cost of borrowing scheme to lower it with the net income that has changed, which means that right now it's inefficient and unsustainable. This will need to be addressed and changed. And secondly, with the fact that it has a lack of government support, which will also be a restriction. And lastly, its prior model in terms of risky loan decisions. Because prior to its hibernation stages, it has decided to give out loans into the commodity markets, which at the time in India was very unstable and faced high fluctuations. Also, it decided to back oil and steel, which face the same risk and also instability. This comes at a necessity to find a new model. And lastly, the operations. This comes in two parts. One, external and internal. The first, external. As we have arrived at the fact that we need to find unmatched opportunities and rebuild our model, we will need to make sure that this new model is fully operational, is sufficient, and also is profitable. Now, we will need to decrease expenses and also increase our credit ratings, as I've said earlier in our objective, in order to increase profitability. And also, we will need to look at the internal factors. Again, as I've stated earlier, in terms of the reorg, we need to make sure that this is the right direction for the company and that this is the right avenue of growth for the company internally. And also, we will need a key focus on the employees and also the management, because this will be key in them in directing its future, especially the employees, because these will be the people who drive our growth. And also, we need them to be very skilled to handle all of the risks and also the opportunities that we need to capture in the future. I'd like to hand it off to my colleague to summarize our issues and also talk about our recommendations.
Thank you very much, Hon Pramod. So now that we have just discussed to you the three main issues that we saw in this case today, let's talk about the solutions to solve each problem. We present to you the 3C strategies that will allow our company, IFCI, to actually come out of hibernation and re-establish its legacy. So how do we do that? Firstly, we need to create the right command to find the right strategies for our company, that what should be the focus of the companies in terms of its positioning with considerations of the business factors and other new competitions that we're exposed to, what should be the policies that we get into. And secondly, once we have decided on the new policy, how do we really translate that strategies into operational changes, and how do we really make sure that we create a profitable business, and that will be done to a constructions of new model that will allow us to re-establish our legacy. And lastly, once we have a new operations and business model, the question is, how do we really change that? And how do we really get our human resources to translate that into actions? And that's with our concur strategies, when we need to concur with our labor union and talk to them and try to create change. And with that strategies, it will allow our company to come out of hibernation, re-establish our legacy with efficient workforce that allow us to translate into profitable businesses. But before we move on to the strategies and dive into how to do that, let's take a step back and see what IFCI has achieved so far. We're a company that was one step away from liquidations. We tried to explore other options, merger acquisitions, and find new partners, but those were not the right options for the company. In fact, we appreciate the fact that we stayed together as a company and we overcome the previous challenges and were able to move out of the liquidation moment. We think that's something we always need to keep in mind. There's a reason behind the fact that we did not go ahead with the merger and acquisitions, or we did not liquidate a company. And that underlying reason is that we want to stay together as a company that provides medium and long-term loans for corporations who are in need of loans, and at the same time, there are no other options for them. With that mentality in mind, let's see how do we translate that into strategies. Firstly, let's take a look at what's going on in the strategies right now. Firstly, we see the changes in the market environment. We see the changes in policies, we changes in government restrictions, so now there are additional competitions for our company, from retails in terms of commercial banking, or even other financial institutions, or more consortiums are changing their business structures. So now we expose us to different risks and different business structures. So at the same time, the company needs to rethink. To stay as a financial institution, a corporate financial institution, what should be the new positioning of the company? In order to come out with the liquidations, we decided to go ahead and stick with the short term, the company decided to go with the short term and the medium term loans to provide to smaller players. But the question is that really a right strategy for the company? And Inspire Consulting have analyzed the pros and cons of the two main options, and we think, in fact, when we look at the company, it's best to go back to our core principle, which is the long-term and medium-term loans. But let's take a look at the pros and cons and why is that the case. Because when we look at the short-term and medium-term loans, we think there's a lot of competitions. We think IDBI right now is already doing that with the SMEs, and other commercial banks are providing short-term and medium-term loans to many players in the market, the fact that if we continue to focus there, it might be profitable in the short run, but we don't think in the long run it will allow us, our company, to come back and establish our legacy like we used to do before. So I think it's important for us to go ahead and stick to the long-term and medium-term corporations loan. And here are a few reasons why. One, it's the core competencies of our company. We have know-how, we have strong network within this market, we know who should be the client, we know who shouldn't be, but at the same time, let's take a look at the SME market. We also think that it's a market that we cannot cater into. But now let's talk a little more on why we still think this medium-term and long-term loan is still a profitable market when we move on to the second strategies on how do we really construct the business to establish its main legacy. This is when we want to analyze to you a little more but before we get into that, let's take a look at the impact of our first strategies. Without impact. Slides number 2, please. Yeah. When we take a look at the impact of the first strategies, we'll we change the refocus of the company, we'll be able to find a positioning that is in fact has no other competitors who are tapped into yet, and at the same time allow us to focus on our core competencies. But of course, we need to find a way to rejuvenate our current business model. So let's move on to the second strategies when we look at the constructions of the legacy. That P. So there are a few things we need to take into considerations right now. There's a reason why the company was unprofitable before. They're based on two main reasons. One is a consumer that we take in to give out loans to, and two is the fact of the unprofitability management. So firstly, let's take a look at the consumer. Who did we give it to in the past? We look at the commodity consumers and we look at other large businesses like greenfields, like oil and steels. What happens under that? Those are commodity businesses. They're subjected to many risks and subjected to many changes in the government and many changes in government policies that could substantially affect the current operations, which makes them become non-performing loans for our company. Non-performing assets for our company. But then the question is, how do we change that? But the fact that there is non-performing asset right now, that makes our company business model become unprofitable. Because right now the income is less than the cost, as we mentioned to you earlier. But when we take a step back and take a look at why don't we get enough income, that means we invest in risky businesses without having a good enough returns. What happened is that we give the people the interest rate that lower than the market at concession rates without taking into considerations enough of the potential fluctuations and enough of the potential change in the market. So we'll present to you the new model, so it comes into two ends. Firstly, we'll talk about how do we change it on the consumer end, and secondly, how do we change it in the supply of the company to make sure that we have self-efficient supply, or to make sure that we have efficient supply to translate that into additional funds, expand the company operations. So firstly, when we take a look at the consumer end, what do we see? From the consumer right now, as I mentioned earlier, we do not have enough considerations with the company operations. So we think the attractive, affordable loan should still be there, but at the same time, for certain risky businesses, for certain risky clients, we actually need to take that into considerations. When there's a potential market risk, or where there's a loan that they don't have enough collaterals, or where there's a change in business policies, we need to factor that in when we calculate the interest rates. So what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve that for a normal company without a lot of risk and high potential returns, a normal concessional rate of interest should be okay. But for a company with higher interest, we need to incur that cost that the company is investing into a risky business as well, to make sure that the return is good enough, and to check upon collateral to make sure that there is recovery potential. So that's the first part of the strategy. Secondly, let's take a look at what can we do with supplies of capital. Within the supply of capital right now, our competitive advantage is that we can get access to supply at lower cost. We could get it from the SLR that's set by the government that allow us to have lower interest rate, but at the same time, we could issue additional new stocks to a certain level to help the company have additional funds to actually finance the current operations and further expansion to come out of the hibernation state. But now let's take a look a little more. Why do we think this is a better strategies? We think this actually will help us in terms of getting lower interest rate because of two main reasons. First of all, the stricter policies and change in our loan management will allow us to have better resources management and at the same time have better credit rating. With better credit rating will also add up effects that allow the company to actually get a lower interest rate, which we think this is how the company to create a sustainable financing for them to have enough money to give out enough loans, and at the same time with profitable loans they'll have enough money to reinvest and have enough money to run the operations. But secondly, we think with this stricter policy will also create impacts of raising confidence within our company. That's why we think our strategies of adding additional shares will also help in terms of that case as well. So now let's move on to what do we see as an impact for our strategies. Within the impact of our strategies will, one, allow the company to focus on what we do best. We know the market of middle and long-term loans, that we know the clients and we should understand the market, and if we can solve the problem that they had earlier, then it should be a profitable strategy that allow us to improve our credit rating and allow us to solve the issues of fund. And at the same time, customers still have affordable loans since we have better rates, better interest rate access to the market. So now let's move on to the third strategies.
Thank you, Akaporn. So now that we have Connect, what we have to do is that how do we eliminate the problem of the cost? The first thing is that we have to understand the voluntary scheme that it has reduced insignificant loss as well as that has an increase on liquidation. So what do we have to do here? As you can see in the year from the 1998 to the year 2008, there's a decrease of numbers of employees. But the thing is that with this, the scheme doesn't reduce the numbers of non-professionals, but it loses the good professionals who are there. Not only that, the quality of the employees are reduced. So what do we have to do here is the next slide, please. So here what we have to do is to eliminate the scheme, as there's less workers and train the current employees that are still existing with us and they have known the company for a long time. That with the leading institute of management that is led by the IFCI, it would help them train the skills and technical skills that they need. The second thing is the labor union. It's very important as this KPA performance are hindered by the labor union strikes, and not only that, it causes potential strike and loses the business sometimes and it has to shut down. So the solution is that we have to have constant communication with the labor union leaders as well as talk between the management so that we ensure that there will be no labor strikes as well as we understand the needs of the labor unions. So for the impact of this strategy is that we have increased the knowledge of training of the current employees, and not only that, we have reduced the cost of the operational. And not only that, with the labor new training, we have changed our policy, which we need the knowledge for them to implement our policy. So let me pass on to my colleague, Quantila, for the financial justification.
Thank you, Pirita. So here we have the implementation timeline. For our first strategy, what do we need to do? We need to do market research as well as expand the corporation loans. For our second strategy, we need to conduct training as well as having policy development. For our third strategy, in which we could be discussed in Q&A part, let's move on to our revenue and cost driver. The main revenue drivers will be from the loans and interest from corporations as a result from high interest rate, and the main cost driver will be from the cost of borrowing. Next, here we have the financial projection, in which again we could be discussed in Q&A. So in conclusion, with the objective of providing a mid to long-term loan at affordable price, as well as improving the workplace, our strategies will be able to solve the issues of unprofitable business models as well as operations and achieve the profit of about 240 million, as well as having a more collaborative workplace. So now IFCI will be able to come out of hibernation and regain its glory. Thank you for your attention. Now the floor is open for Q&A.
Could you speak to me a little bit more about the end profitability number in 2018? You got a number of 243 million. How did you get to that number and what thought process went into that?
Well, we have the expected growth of income from operation, profitable, of about 10%. So that's based on, we benchmark it from the historical data given in the case.
And did you factor in any threats to that growth going forwards from the past?
I'm not sure if I really understand the question. Could you please?
So can you rely on the past growth number to project the future?
Well, due to the limited information given, so yeah, we hope that we could also use other additional information if there's like other, for example, if we can use the internet, maybe we could have more accurate data.
Can I ask about improving the credit rating, which you say is quite important, to access cheaper capital? Is there a catch-22 element in the credit rating which reflect performance, and yet you want to use credit rating to drive performance?
Pardon?
Is there any sort of catch-22 effect? Is you like better credit ratings as access to cheaper capital to be able to offer better loans with better spreads? But the credit rating also reflects your performance, so
Yeah.
they go both ways.
Yeah.
How do you see realistically getting a better credit rating? You mentioned, for example, issuing stock to recapitalize or whatever.
So actually I think there are two things that we want to do. So firstly, we want to make sure that we have a better performance coming from a stricter policies that we want to establish in terms of changing the interest rate for a risky business. So that's the first thing. We assume that with that strategy, it will allow us to actually have a better recovery rates or like returns from loans, which will allow the company itself to generate more income, and that means the net profitable, the bottom line should increase as well. So that's one way of enhancing the performance, improve the credit rating. But at the same time, we think the fact that we'll have profitability that allow us to have additional resources and additional capital to actually reinvest and expand our loan operations. But we think in the current period, we're still not cash rich that much, and we don't want the company to issue additional loans in in something that they might not be able to repay in the future. And we think, given the current confidence that have been boosted in our company right now in the Indian market, we think issuing additional stocks to allow the company to actually gain additional capital to reinvest in the business to expand its operation as well. And in the end, there are two effects: that one will have additional resources as in capital, and two will be able to gain a better profitability and better performance. We think both combined will improve a better financial statement that will allow our company to gain better rating, that in the end helps us get additional loans at lower rate, which also help the companies in the future in accessing the loans with lower cost of borrowing, which also means that that's also create another trickle-down effects to create a better profitability.
So are you saying then that you go to capital markets with your own equity to raise funding to loan to better performing clients, SMEs, so you will earn more over here than you're paying over here?
Pardon, I might not understand the question, sorry.
Okay, don't worry, I'll got what you said, that's fine.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine, it's good.
Just talking about the funding, you mentioned you're going to be going to the government for the cheaper funding.
Yeah.
I guess to the point here, going to the capital markets but relying on a cheaper source of funding, how do you factor in being able to be sustainable by yourself without cheaper funding from the government? So if the government pulled that funding, would the capital markets be there to support you?
And that's actually what we consider in our strategy construction. sorry. In our strategy construction as well. We think at current period right now, we have ability to access a lower fund from government set policies. So that's why we think in the short run that's make us more profitable. But at the same time, we did factor in the fact that in the future there might be changes from the government, because it seems like the government is having the mentality of trade liberalizations and they don't want to look like they're subsidizing current local market. So what we actually factor in is the policies of accessing funding from many sources. But at the same time, when we get, as I mentioned earlier, the effects that happen, we think that better crediting our loans will allow us to access funds from other institutions that will allow us to get a little bit better rate, a more competitive rates than other competitors.
Just going back to the implementation of your plan and your focus on profitability. So how do you see in your new structure decisions being made? How do you envisage decisions about which business to take up, how to charge? How do you sort of see that being handled?
So basically, because we have to implement our new policy, so it boils down to the point that we have to train our employees, the existing one, because there's a set of new knowledge and skills, technical skills that is needed for them to understand the policy that is implemented. With the knowledge that they gain, they will be able to implement our policy that the IFCI has changed.
To add on to that, at the same time, in the second strategy is when we try to reconstruct the business and a new business model. What we essentially want to do is we want to spend a little bit more time trying to create a policy development and train our employee. So with policy development, it will be a long process, it will be a serious, stressful process, so we need to factor in all the potential risk in the market, then we need to consider all the stakeholders involved to create implementable policies for our staff to actually make sure that they only authorize the right loans, and at the same time, we think we need to set up criteria for how large the loan is and who in the organization have a say to authorize which loans. I hope that answers the question.
And can I ask why you didn't explore looking at other aspects of the market, so perhaps the private banking side or retail banking or perhaps even asset management?
Well, to answer your question first, as we've derived up the three main segments, which are the retail and also the corporate and SMEs. As for retail, the company hasn't ventured out into retail banking at all, and we believe that it's so far from our core competency that we won't be able to survive, seeing as the fact that we've just, coming back from our hibernation. So that's not a viable option for us. Even though there are pros, we think that the cons outweigh them. And secondly, as for the SMEs, as I mentioned earlier, our competitor, mainly IDBI, has a very established foothold in that market already in terms of providing loans and also consultation and also underwriting companies, which means that if we're able to get the resources to mobilize and move into the SME and really to attack that market, we believe that, again, coming out of hibernation, that's not the place where we want to go, and that's not the competitors we want to attack head on. Which means that we will need to look at unmatched opportunities and also our core competencies and what we've done in the past, and drawing from that, we've derived at the fact that we need to address corporations. I hope that adequately answered your question.
There's actually two more reasons why we did not invest in SME, which we think is something that we took into serious consideration when we calculate our strategies. First of all, we understand that in India itself, there's a growing trend of a lot of SME being burst out and many people start to become an entrepreneur. But at the same time, we consider a few things. One, there's an established market for SME to source their financing already. That, for example, IDBI established a whole nationwide network in collaborations with other financial institutions to invest into incubating these SME businesses. But at the same time, we think many of SME with good collateral will be able to access funding from normal commercial banks. And lastly, the reason why we did not want to invest in SME, because it's rather a small amount of loans and rather a small returns, that at the same time we will not be able to get a good amount of profitability to come out and become big again. And also the fact that SME in many times, they don't have good enough collateral for us to make sure that we have good recoveries. And many of the times it's a small businesses that we don't know if it's going to be successful yet. And that require other additional expertise that companies do not possess yet.
I guess just in addition to that, it's very much a domestic strategy.
Mm-hmm.
To what degree did you entertain international expansion?
Actually, first of all, we think the company right now is just undergone a very serious economic downfall for the company. They were under a serious financial discussion whether or not the company should liquidate. But at the same time, when we think the company just came out of recovery, we think the company needs to build its base first before considers international expansions. But at the same time, we also consider the company right now as not having enough resources to expand into international market. And we think in order to go and be profitable in international market, we also need to develop a long-term partner, a good, strong partner to get a network into the next market. And we think that's a strategy that we're not yet capable to do. So that's why we also eliminate other international strategies in that case.
And I think earlier on in the presentation you mentioned Concur.
Yeah.
Which is talking about your relationship with unions.
Yeah.
In terms of concurring with the unions, does that then mean, in terms of your HR plans, that you're not able to develop some of the things that you want? Can you just talk a little bit more about how you work with the unions to drive that?
Okay. First of all, the situation with the company is we have a very interesting relationship with our labor union. That many of the time they support our policies. They're actually not really afraid of cost cutting in terms of cost reducing the pay packages or bonus packages for people or changing the retirement age. But with the labor union itself, we think they're quite powerful in our companies. But at the same time, when we think we are able to restructure the company and change and train people in certain way, we'll be able to hear the people a little more, which allow us to understand our employee. That will, in the end, hopefully will allow us to actually capture a better understanding of labor union that will allow us to achieve our goals.
You talked quite a bit about the past glory and the history. How relevant do you think the history is to the future of what your plans are?
For us, we actually think it's quite important. Our operation was started and was initiated with government supports to become an organization that helps many institutions or many commercials or industrial estates, companies around India that lack funding and need a middle and long-term funding that they can't normally get in commercial market. And we think with that positioning of the company itself, it becomes a very relevant institutions within India that they need to be there to finance and help these companies. Otherwise, they won't have other options. But at the same time, we think the company, by the fact it have a long historic path, it allows the company to gain expertise within the market. That's why we think these are core competencies that we don't want to give away just yet. So that's why we want to further explore the current positioning of the company and stick with the middle and long-term loans to help the people and make sure that they have access to affordable funding. And at the same time, of course, the company needs to take a look a little bit more on its profitability ability, which is sort of neglected in the past. So we think there needs to be a balance between the former legacy to just help people and a balance between the company being to be profitable in the long run and be a sustainable corporation to continue its goal of making sure that people and corporations around India get access to the right funding.
Some of what you say is you're talking about improving efficiencies, operating better, basically. Apart from improving HR and training, why do you think that wasn't the case before, and why is it going to be the case going forward?
We think the problem in the past at to a certain level is the company size, one, was significantly large when we have almost 5,000 people, and two, we did not bring in a lot of important stakeholders or the head of the labor union to negotiate in many things. So we think that's why many of the time people were not willing to change and implement many new changes that we try. For example, like the key performance appraisal policy that we try to change. So that's why we think when we listen to people a little bit more, when we get to collaborate with them a little bit more, that should help to a certain level, improve efficiency of the company.
Okay, thank you very much. This is the end of the